Namaste and Jai Hind, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very different conversation that I'm looking forward to have because normally it's about news, it's politics, etc., etc. But today is a very important element of our itihasa that we are going to go back and understand. And it's a big reveal. Not just do we have Yajnadevam in person, but we're also going to tell our viewers why what he's doing is so significant. And it's all around the Indus script. So our origins, the Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, we know of the sites, the Indus Valley civilization, our own history. There are various claimants to it, and there are various aspects to it. But what's important is the Indus script. And we are in conversation with a man who claims to have deciphered the Indus script, and that too with conviction that those who have claimed before and those who would claim after will not be able to match or will not be able to try and argue against. So, Yajnadevam, namaste, and thank you very much for making the time. I know it's bright and early in your part of the world. You're based in the US. We're looking forward to you joining us in India very soon. But first, let me ask you, what is your profession and how did you get into this? And why the Indus script and getting into languages and scripts in the first place?
Yes, great questions. By profession, I'm a computer programmer. I have a background in cryptography. I worked in, my cryptography background is old but relevant to this particular problem. During October 2021, something like that, I think it was during COVID, I was looking for a hard problem to solve, which would keep me occupied for a while, and I bumped into the Indus script problem. And as a student in my engineering college, I used to clip the cryptograms from newspapers and do it in class when the lecturer is speaking. So I thought, maybe this could work as a cryptogram. And I tried it and it worked, and that's how I got into it, to mathematically prove it as well.
So when you say you've deciphered the Indus script, is a script different from a language? So what's the
Yes.
base language? And then you also drawn parallels, and there are times. Now the Indus Valley civilization and the itself is spread over at least 1500 years, if not more. And please correct me if I'm wrong. So how were you able to see, and which periods did you watch? And is there a change in the script? Because is Brahmi different from the Indus script? But did they both represent the same language? What's your finding?
Okay, that's a whole set of questions. Let me take them one by one. First of all, yes, a script is, so a language is essentially a string of symbols that humans use to encode knowledge or concepts, right? And those can be pretty much anything. So a language, when we say language, we essentially mean auditory symbols, okay, auditory encoding of information. When you say script, it's essentially a visual encoding. And generally, there is no exact one-to-one correspondence between how strict that correlation is, or that assignment is. And you can write a language in many scripts. So, for example, today we write Hindi and Sanskrit in what's called Devanagari. But before that, there were other Nagaris. And before that, it was Brahmi. And what I discovered is that Brahmi essentially comes from Indus script. So you can also write, people have written, for example, Sanskrit in many other scripts. In Malayalam script, we see inscriptions. In Kadamba script, which eventually became Kannada and Telugu script, we see inscriptions and so on. So a script is essentially a visual representation because you cannot carry sound through time. Okay, I mean, now you have recordings, but in those days, that is how they created it. So that is the first question. The second question is, what is the nature of the script and the language and so on? So when I initially deciphered it, I had forgotten all the Sanskrit or whatever it was in. So I used what's called a greedy strategy. So what happens is when you have a string without spaces, so spacing in scripts was invented sometime in the 7th century. Like the 5th century is the first sample we see. In the 7th century in in Syriac or somewhere in the Middle East, they started putting spaces consistently, like consistent use of spaces. But most of the writing didn't actually have spaces. So when you have text without spaces, you have to parse it in a particular way, and depending on how you parse it, you could get different meanings. And in fact, a lot of Indian poetry is based on parsing a thing differently to generate different meanings. Okay, like it's called Slasha poetry. So when I started parsing it, initially I parsed it as a greedy parser, and I just, as long as I got all the words, for me, the phonotactics was right, and that's the language, and I'm leaving the rest to the Sanskrit scholars. The phonotactics essentially is the constraint where certain sequences of sounds don't occur in a language. It's different for each language. For example, in Sanskrit, you don't get anything that is a voiced stop followed by unvoiced stop. So you don't have, ga, ka, or ja, cha, or something like that. It doesn't occur in the dictionary. The exception is the and the, but otherwise it doesn't occur. Like there's no, and many words like, so for example, if I say hema, you know what it is. If I say hey na, there's no word like that. So there are phonotactics like this, which tell you that if you can assign words, then the language is correct. It's just the rest is just parsing. But when I announced it, I didn't have any following, and I guess the people who are good in Sanskrit, they said, well, this doesn't have proper grammar and so on. So I started learning the grammar and trying to read it again with grammar. And then it was very shocking because one of the things I learned was that it is the entire corpus is readable with Paninian grammar. Okay, so the grammar is essentially not entire. There are a couple of Vedic forms, but most of it is readable as Sanskrit grammar. So that was very shocking. The other shocking thing was the script was Abugida. Now you have to appreciate the old scripts from that time, the Bronze Age. They were all like syllabic or logographic or something like that. Like an Abugida script from the Bronze Age is very impressive. So it is. It is a very wonderful script. It's great to read all these things from 4,500 years, old inscriptions.
So, but did it change? Now you are in the process of transcribing a certain portion of the scripts.
Yes.
There is a lot of information on indusscript.net, but I also want to understand from you that when you started the process of translating, the Abugida script is, like you said, logographic, so pictorial. So there are arguments which say that the hand up or the hand sideways, the hand down should mean different things.
Right.
There are too many lines on the body, no lines on the body tend to mean different things. So lateral, vertical, and all of that. But you have a different argument to that.
Yeah. So let me answer the question: did the script change? The first, what we call graffiti, the first evidence of the script is actually from 4000 BC in a place called Balakot. 4000 BC is 6,000 years ago. And I know of no other script from that time. Now, the only issue is we don't know what the nature of the script was at that time. It could be purely pre-writing. It could, we don't actually know. We do find some of the signs that are abstracted. Now, abstraction is a sign of progress over time. So, like if, for example, in the Latin letter A, which in English we call A, originally represented a bull. It was the bull with the horns. And it's the word that was, that was representing was Alep, which means bull in that language. And eventually it became alpha in Greek. Okay. And then we just call it A. So originally, a lot of the writing was pictorial in the sense that it represented either the object itself, the sound of the object, the first syllable or whatever. And the same thing may be true of Indus script whenever it started. So 4,000 is the earliest evidence we have. It could be earlier for all we know. So then Eventually, over time, it got standardized. So if you look at the early stages of the script around the early Harappan period 3A, there are only 71 signs. So 71 signs is a very small number that it cannot be logographic. It wouldn't make sense to have, for a script to be like that. And then we start seeing new signs being added. And these new signs, most of them, when you look at signs and want to classify them, is a question. If it's a hand-carved system, like the Indus script, so if in a typewritten system or, in a typeset system, if you look at G and C, they're different, even though they're very close. If you look at E and F, they're different, although there's only like a line difference. But in a hand-carved system, every letter, it's like a handwriting. Everyone is different. Every time somebody writes it is different. So how do you determine what are the actual signs? So this is the difference between a sign and a glyph. A sign is an abstraction that describes how you're going to interpret something as a particular concept. So for the letter A, you can say that it is two lines that are joined at the top, not joined at the bottom, and there is some horizontal connection between them. And if you look at all the fonts, there must be like 10,000 fonts in existence. You have all kinds of A's. You have the A that is slanting, you have the A that is fat, you have the Gothic one with all the little decorations. But still, you look at it and you know it's A. Okay. So when you decipher a sign, you are not trying to, it's not sufficient to say this glyph. So each version of the sign is a glyph. That this particular glyph has this value. You have to actually reconstruct the sign. And the way you do it with cryptography, so this is essentially an epigraphic concern. It's not a cryptographic concern, but you can do it with cryptography by just pretending all those glyphs are individual signs and try to determine their value. And if very similar glyphs all arrive at the same value, then you can be sure that they are all the same sign. They're just minor variants. They're either stylistic variants, regional variants, or so on. So what we have is, in the early phases, when they started carving, they were not planning anything. So you would get all the signs, and the final thing would be, it would start getting crowded and so on. But eventually you would see even long inscriptions, very well planned. They have, uniform width, they have uniform distance between them and so on. So that is a indication that the writing evolved, and they, but how the changes, when you say how did the letters change, they essentially got abstracted. So, for example, the horse, some of the horses are very well drawn out, and then there's just a little abstract head and tail, and so it gets simplified and simplified and simplified. This is what it's a gradual evolution, and still sometimes they use the old forms as well, especially if it's the first letter of the first sign of the inscription. It's just like in print, you'll see sometimes the first sign is very elaborate, like it's big and it's elaborate. So these are natural things that happen in all writing systems. Did I miss one of the questions?
But how are you convinced that this is Sanskrit?
Right.
Were there no other languages at all which were represented in the Indus script?
Yeah, good question. Good question. So now the question is, what language could be candidate for the Indus script? If you're using the cryptographic system, actually you don't have to guess. You can try every language you can try all the 7,000 of the world's languages. And using computers, it's only going to take you, a few weeks, maybe months to figure out. And one of them will work. Every other one will fail. Every other one will fail. Okay? Because this is the nature of language. In language, when I have, like I said, after a particular sound, there can only be some other sounds. And after two particular sounds, that can be even fewer sounds. So that pattern is called, what in cryptography we call it a residue pattern. Okay, right. Because the symbols themselves are irrelevant. The adjacencies are what that matter. You can replace the symbols with variables or just numeric codes. It doesn't matter. Okay, So you could try all 7,000 languages, and one of them would succeed. But I didn't have that kind of time, and I didn't want to write a programming system because I was just doing it as a fun project. So then, realistically, the candidates are Old Dravidian and Old Indo-Aryan. Okay, so Old Dravidian essentially is because we don't know. So the Proto-Dravidian has not been reconstructed beyond 800. Okay, so you can't use it. You will get everything negative. So you can use Tamil as a proxy. You can use Sanskrit as proxy. But the question is, what was the language? What was the grammar? What was the phonology? Was there additional, clusters of consonants? Will anything match? That's the question. So if you look at the Indian texts, a lot of the texts were written bang in the middle of the mature Indus phase, where most of the inscriptions are from. So, for example, in Vishnu Purana, I think it's Vishnu Purana, it describes Dhruva as the pole star. Now, Dhruva, the pole star today, which is Polaris, was not a pole star till about the year 500. So if Vishnu Purana was written earlier than that, what is the previous pole star? That previous pole star is Alpha Draconis in the Draco constellation. And there was a pole star around 2300 BC. Similarly, if you look at the calendaring system in the Brahmanas, right? They describe so this is, for example, in the Gopata Brahmana, it says the year starts between Purva Palguni and Uttara Palguni, exactly between them. That date is 3500 BC. And this is like this, there's no room for interpretation. People say that, astronomical dating is interpretation. It is true, for a lot of them it's interpretation. But there are some things that are absolutely practical manuals. One more is that when you create an altar, I think this is Shatapada Brahmana, when you create an altar, it has to face east. And how do you know it's east? Kritika always rises in east during the spring equinox. And that is again 2300 BC. So a lot of this Indian texts refer to that particular time, 2300, between 2300 and 2600 BC, which is exactly the same as the mature Indus phase. So that is one. The second is in Sumeria, where the Indus Valley were trading, they have some names attested that are not Sumerian, but they happen to be Sanskrit names. The inscriptions depict what's called stem compounding. So essentially, you have sequences of words that join in this way and this way, and so multi-stem compounding occurs only in like a handful of words languages. It occurs in Sanskrit. It occurs in German. It doesn't occur anywhere else. It precisely doesn't occur in Dravidian. Okay, in Dravidian compounds, there's only two words. Okay, like you have verb, noun, you have noun, adjective, and so on. So based on all of these indications, so I was able to extend his claim to show that it could not just be not Dravidian, but it could not be any agglutinative language. So it couldn't be Japanese, it couldn't be Sumerian, it couldn't be Elamite. Most of the world's languages are agglutinative. Okay, so I was able to show that it's not agglutinative. So Sanskrit was the only thing, and once I started deciphering it, I wanted to read. I had to read beyond the unicity distance, which is about 500 letters, 500 signs. So the longest inscription is about, I think, 20 signs, 20 or 22 signs. If I could read it grammatically, so I remember I don't know what the grammar is at this time. Okay, so I said, well, because I don't know Aindra grammar or any of the old grammars. I only know Paninian grammar.
Right.
So I said, okay, let me try with this, and I was able to read it. It was shocking to me because it's like I couldn't sleep because of the adrenaline. Okay, it was just okay. So then I said, okay, if I got this first one, which is the longest, then I can get the next 50 longest ones. If I get the 50 longest ones, then I cross the unicity distance.
Yes.
So I got the 50 longest, then I wrote the paper because I was at this point, it's mathematically impossible for it to be anything else.
Correct.
And recently I have deciphered 600 longest. So at this point, it is like about 40% complete of the whole corpus is deciphered. It's translated. I mean, deciphering is just the
I'm just curious to ask you, did anybody challenge your decipherment? Did any of the other decipherers claim the
Unjustified.
decipherers challenge?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say challenge. They showed disbelief, so it's a mathematical thing. See, there is not much to challenge. The methodology is pre-existing. There is nothing radically new in what the inscriptions show. How to read the text, there's nothing new. It is similar to Achaemenid cuneiform. So what are you going to challenge? There's nothing new. It's just that a known system has been applied to this problem. So if you're going to say the method is false, you're going to say entire information theory is false because this comes from Shannon. Right? Like your computer, your encryption, this Zoom call, everything depends on Shannon's work. That it actually depends on that very paper. So all of that would be false. Okay. And there are some people who said, oh, anything can be read as Sanskrit. Anything. Like you can put any jumble of, because Sanskrit is a magical language. Actually, that's not true. I mean, Sanskrit is a great language. I respect it a lot. But language is not magic. Language needs to have something called redundancy. You need to add certain extra symbols to the minimum information. Otherwise, your brain is not going to be able to organize that information.
Organize it, yeah.
Okay.
A retaliatory strike, Israel has hit back at Iran, claiming that it conducted strikes against military targets in response to Tehran's attacks on Israel. Now, the attack comes in the wake of high-running anticipation of escalations after Tehran's attack. Remember, on 1st of October, over 200 ballistic missiles were fired at Israel, Iran's second direct attack on Israel in the last 6 months. Now, in a statement, IDF has said, and I quote, in response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the state of Israel, right now, the Israel Defense Forces is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. Let's hear out what the IDF had actually had to say.
In response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the state of Israel, right now, the Israel Defense Forces is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentless.
Was there a thought continuum? You said 4000 BC till as recent as 2600 BC, or even before, even after that. So that right. Itself is about 2,000-3,000 years. So was there a continuity? Even if the script changed a bit, even if the interpretation changed a bit, but was there a thought continuum in the language, in the knowledge that was passed?
So in terms of culture, we already know there is a continuity. Like this is before my decipherment, we know. For example, the symbols you use today, like swastika, sindoor, the way the streets are planned, the pots and pans they use, the jewelry they wear, the patterns you still find on the clothes today, they're all from Indus Valley. So there, in fact, it would be hard for me to find something in Indus Valley that's still not continued here. Very few things, if any. Okay. So in terms of the conceptual things, in terms of the stories and so on, so you see iconography that is very, very that cannot be interpreted in any other way except as in like Puranas. So there is this iconography of a lady whose one hand is held by one person, by a male, the other hand is held by another male, and they are fighting each other. So this is the story of Tilottama and Sunda and Upasunda fighting over her. And this can only be depicted in one way. You have a woman in the center, you have a man holding one hand on the other side, and they have sword or something, they're fighting each. You cannot depict it in any other way. So it appears to me that a lot of the texts are talking about rudra. Okay, Rudra and the iconography of the sacrifices. So Rudra is the presiding deity of the sacrifices. Okay, so Vishnu is the protector of the sacrifice, but Rudra is the presiding deity of the sacrifices. So it's it just describes Rudra. It has all these names of Rudra which are new even to me. Okay, even in the dictionaries you don't find them. Most of them mean killer or someone who roars. Rudra is someone who So I found it very interesting in Ashruda. Ashruda means someone who grants tears. Like he makes you cry. So you have that. You have some references to Vedic texts. So the first 50, the longest 50, all of them are references to some Rig Vedic verse, except one which is a references to Sri Rudra, which is from the Yajurveda. Okay. So they are compact forms, and the reason is, the seals are about this big. They're like a coin, okay, like a big coin, and you can't fit the whole thing in there. So you write a compact, version of it.
Now, why is it significant today for us? Let me ask you, what's in it for this generation, us, and also the future? What you've been able to decipher? What is it that you've seen in that knowledge system that helps us today? Does it also disprove this entire Aryan invasion theory altogether? Does it also show us as one of the oldest continuum of civilizations from the time of the Indus Valley?
Yeah, no, all of those answer is yes. I mean, first of all, so when something continues for a long time, there's a reason for it. That means it is a very successful and well-designed system. And if you abandon that system for something that's new and flashy, you have to understand that those other systems come and go. And many of these things have come and gone. And, the Indian civilization has seen... So if you look at the vastness of Indian civilization, if you look at the whole time frame, in between you'll see these blips coming and going and nothing happens. So the question is, do you want to be part of that little blip, or do you want to be part of something that goes into forever, right? So that is the question. And I think that most people have a need to feel a deep connection to something. And if they don't feel a deep connection to their tradition, their history, and their civilization, then they will look into other things to connect to, okay? Which could be an alternate political system, or anything, alternate ideology. Now all this Western ideology is very popular, but you got to understand that Western ideology changes every 20-30 years.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sir.